Hi, and welcome again to this segment of We the People. I'm Shane Del Cohen, your host. In our continuing parade of Campaign 98, we've seen a lot of people aspiring to public office. It's my great pleasure to welcome today a veteran legislator, Assemblywoman Vivian Freeman. Welcome.
Thank you, Shane. It's a pleasure.
Well, Vivian, we have a large viewing audience, and I hope they all call into the station and continue to express their comments on our shows. But a lot of people probably don't know you. So could we know a little bit more about Vivian Freeman?
Well, let me see. My husband and I have lived in the district for about 34 years, lived in Reno about 36 years, and in fact, we've even lived in the same house for about 34 years. In Old Northwest Reno, the university is in my district, and we're bordered by McCarran and I-80 and 395. So it represents the older part of Reno, and assembly districts are small in almost any of the races, either on the state or the local level. The assembly districts are almost always the smallest. So it's not unusual for people outside our district to not be aware of us.
Right. So who's Vivian Freeman? How did she get to be a legislator?
Well, I grew up in a very political family. In the evenings, we discussed politics in our family. And so I have a long-standing interest in it. My parents were Roosevelt Democrats, so we spoke a lot about politics during that area of time. And after I'd raised my children and they were teenagers, I decided to run for the Board of Trustees of the school board because my kids were in school. But the incumbent ran again, and there were 6 of us in the primary, and none of us survived except him and one other person. So then I ran a few years later for the Hospital Board of Washoe Med, which was still publicly owned. And because my background professionally is in healthcare, I ran for that and won one of the 3 seats. Did that for 4 years, and during that period of time, sort of reconsidered, and the incumbent in this district decided to move on to the Senate. So I filed and ran for it, and I've served ever since 1986.
And what stands out in your mind about being a legislator?
Well, I think the ability to get to know people and to make a difference in their lives, and to have a better understanding of how the different levels of government interrelate, the state, the federal, the county, the city, how we all have to work together for common goals.
Now that is a big agenda item and a big menu. How do you get people to agree on everything?
Well, you don't, quite basically. And in the legislature, one house is controlled by the Republicans and one house controlled by the Democrats. But it does provide for a nice balance so that we hear the opposing points of view, and a bill of any consequence or size almost always goes into a conference committee at the end of the session so we can reconcile our differences and come up with legislation that makes sense and that is acceptable.
And it's sort of the ultimate test of the democratic process?
Yes, it is. It is. One thing I would like to see is more participation by the voting public in the legislative process. I wish that more people would become involved, and Carson City is only 35 miles away, or 30 miles. I'd like to see more people from Washoe County show up to observe what we do.
Do you see constituents becoming involved other than attending sessions?
Well, get to know your candidates, and I know that involves a lot of homework, but it's something very important. I was listening to the news tonight that one of the voting areas, 85% of the voters up to this time of day were senior citizens, which indicates that they're working people in school and whatever. So it can sometimes be inconvenient to fit into that schedule, but now with the early voting, it's much easier to vote early, to do your homework, and to become part of the process. And it's an interesting thing that as the number of registered voters goes up, the percentage of people who vote does not go up.
And that really is kind of interesting. In terms of involvement, there are a lot of new things now that somebody can do at home in terms of getting on the web, calling up different, all the state agencies are there, proceedings of the legislature are there.
Right.
Do you, as a legislator, hold community meetings or have an opportunity for people to interact?
Well, we are planning to have more evening meetings so people can attend. And for the last about 8 years, I've chaired interim committees between sessions. And as often as possible, we have hearings in the Reno area so people can attend. But even then, we don't get much of a turnout. I think it was 2 sessions ago in the legislature, we decided to try to do a little more outreach to the voters, and it was at that time that we computerized the building, and we have the kiosks in the lobbies and so on so that people can access what we do on the internet. You're probably aware that last session it was possible to find out what was going on the websites.
Right.
So we are making a sincere effort to do more outreach to the public.
Because you're in a campaign season now, you must be out walking and talking to people. Are any people giving you feedback about things like internet access?
No, not really. It hasn't changed that much over the years. It's mostly local issues that people are interested in. Neighborhoods change, but they don't change that much. After all, politics does start at home at the local level with your home, your block, your neighborhood, and it goes from there. So by and large, that's what it consists of. I did talk to a man the other day who talked to me about a lot of federal issues, but that is rather unusual. Most people focus more on the local issues and how it affects them and their families.
Well, some people have talked about how federal issues do impact on state government, particularly with the exchange of dollars. Do you think that people really need to know more about the federal?
Well, I do, and in the last, I'd say probably 3 years, the federal government and the Congress has decided to share a lot of the responsibility with the states, which wasn't true in the past. And if you're talking about health care or highways or whatever, they say, well, based on this rather complex formula, it can be based on miles as versus population for the amount of money. And they say to the state, we will send you X number of dollars. And within these guidelines that are in the federal legislation and regulations, we expect you to make the hard decisions and decide how to spend the money. So a lot of the decisions that used to be made in Washington, D.C. are now made in Carson City. So voters really need to educate themselves as to those issues and work with us to do what's best for Nevada.
Do you think that you can really say that some people almost a decade ago said, we don't want control in Washington, we want local control. And so what you're really saying here is that it has actually affected.
Well, everyone says that local government closer to home is the best, and it does give you an opportunity to participate in your city council meetings and school board and so on. You don't have to drive 30 miles to get there. You can still participate. So I think that this is to the advantage of the average voter. I was thinking one day when I was a kid and was growing up, people seemed much closer to government than they do now, and that my parents were very aware of what government was doing and what their impact could be. And I don't see a lot of that type of involvement anymore.
Do you think a lot of voters now, because they have the privilege, it's been instituted, we've gone a long way from constitutional government that gave the vote to white, male property owners to a very inclusive system. Do you think that some people now, because they haven't had to fight for the right to vote, just let it go?
I'm sure that's part of it, yes. Also, the world has become much more complex. It's more difficult to, you can still get the information, but what are you going to do with it once you get it? And everything is enormously complex, and I find that in Carson City as well. And I've been asked several times, why are you running this time? And my answer is, quite frankly, I see the need for experience, for knowledge of the system, and how to work within that system and be effective for your constituents. Another factor is that as Clark County grows, and at least 2/3 of our legislators are from Clark County, it's very important that we retain our senior members who very often chair committees and have the ability to be more effective in Carson City. So seniority is very important for people from Washoe County.
And you sort of led into the question I was going to ask about, you've sat in the legislature through some of the most dramatic changes in Nevada. It's unprecedented in terms of population, but we're also in a whole new era. A whole that's creating new demands on creating diversification in an economic structure, in a society that's in a global world. What are these issues do you hold close to yourself?
Well, I think that the issues of family and the quality of life are core of any of our concerns. And I tend to focus more on those. I am currently serving as vice chair of the Standing Healthcare Committee, so we hear a lot of those issues there. Been very involved in the mental health issue, which is one of those issues that are very easy to ignore. But in the last year, I see more focus on concerns over what we're not doing really for the mental health community. And certainly the congressional bill having to do with parity in regards to insurance has made us pay a little more attention. I'm on the Legislative Oversight Committee on TRPA, environmental concerns, and I'm also now on the Taxation Committee. So, and I see a lot of changes coming in all of those areas.
Any three that you can focus on that the public should be real aware of?
Well, I think one of the things the Health Committee is considering how to set up health care insurance for disadvantaged children or children whose parents make too much to qualify for Medicaid, but they don't
have enough
to buy insurance. So we're discussing that. We're looking at long-term care for the elderly and the disabled. We have a number of committees, one on mental health issues, subcommittees, and so we are focusing on those, and I would hope during the session we'll get...
Well, healthcare tends to touch everybody. There is probably not one constituent and even one non-registered voter out there for whom healthcare is not an issue.
It's universal.
And it's a big question.
Yes. Well, it's actually become almost an insurance question. That wasn't something that many of us used to worry about, but it's almost now become not only the quality of health care, but access and what it costs, and insurance is very much part of that.
Well, I think you could say that in the last 2 decades we've witnessed a change in society where health care came from sort of a charitable purpose.
That's right.
It was established as a nonprofit in most communities, either through churches or through county governments. And it's changed and it's become a commodity and it's sold on a market. And most of the people that are purveyors of that are insurance companies. That's a whole different flavor.
Yeah, well, that happened in the 1960s when Medicare passed, and all of a sudden the healthcare industry, and I call it an industry because that's what it is, had access to all that federal money. And it changed the complexion of healthcare forever. It's interesting to note that the man who really started this in the South, in Tennessee to be exact, with the HMOs and all the rest, was the man who started Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he used the same principles of starting a business with the healthcare business, delivery of healthcare, as he had with Kentucky Fried Chicken, yes.
Well, that really is probably a very good description of what's happened to a lot of industries. And people are kind of caught in it.
They are.
Do you see any particular responses from Nevada, or are we just sort of reacting to crisis?
Well, unfortunately, we do tend to be reactive rather than progressive in doing what we need to do. And I think a lot of the reason for that is the enormous growth in Nevada. And it's just hard to keep up, by and large. It's a state that does not enjoy paying taxes, So all of us are now being told you have to be more efficient, work harder, and come to us, let us know what's going on. It makes government more accountable, and I do support that. I think that's our obligation.
Are any of the new constituency bringing new resources or new ideas?
Well, because I represent an older part of Northwest Reno, and of the growth, and I don't know that you would call it growth, but with the downtown problems, with the growth of the university and not a lot of housing available for students, it's having an impact on old Northwest Reno. It's changing a great deal. People complain more of petty theft and don't feel as safe in their homes as they used to. So the character of Reno has changed enormously in the last few years.
Well, as you said earlier, you've always been interested in quality of life issues, and of course, I remember you for sort of being the champion of recycling.
Yes.
Which at one time people thought was really way out there, and now is the reasonable and the proper thing to do, as well as becoming quite a commodity in its own right. Garbage is now very much elevated in the world.
Well, I tell you, when we were working on that bill, I learned more about trash and garbage than I ever wanted to know. But it is a commodity now. You're right.
And there's some amazing products being made out of garbage. But you can look back into that time and have been a pioneer. I think one of the other concerns that you would probably be very astute in addressing is the fact that because of the growth and because we're coming up to the year 2000, that one of the real important things of this new legislature is going to ultimately be the redistricting.
Yes.
And you spoke earlier about the small size of your district, and it does make it rather intimate, and it is very, well, I won't say easy. It makes it more, you have more ability to truly represent your district.
Yes.
But now we have a large growth, and all the districts are going to change. There are some that would like to keep it at the same base, and there are some that would like to make it smaller. What's your perception?
Some years ago that was discussed very seriously, whether we should increase the number of legislators, and I don't think that any of us are opposed to that, but the building simply would not accommodate that many more legislators. Since we have remodeled, there is space there, so we could increase the size, probably 4 more in Clark County and 2 more in Washoe County, and I suspect that will be happening. But at the same time that happens, we will be losing seats up here, and Clark County will be gaining. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Perhaps we can do it in such a way that we won't lose seats, but it still puts us at a disadvantage in terms of just the number of people that we represent.
Well, how many are in your district now?
I have 30,000 currently, and there are districts in Las Vegas. There's one that is really very small, smaller than mine, and others that are 2 or 3 times as large as mine because of the growth issues down there. In other areas, the population has actually dropped. So it's a reflection of the changing urban society.
Well, they do say Nevada's the most urbanized state in the Union, which if you love the rest of Nevada and you travel the rurals, you look at all the land and say, who's representing this? And it falls back again on the legislature to do that.
Well, we find that the rural legislators tend to be retained by their constituents, so they have long-time seniority, and their influence in the legislature is highly disproportionate to the number of people that they represent. But there are people who, I talked about the need for seniority, you understand the issues, you know the players, and you know how the system works, you can be much more effective. And they are highly effective for their districts.
Well, don't you think they sort of help provide a corporate memory, so as to speak?
Yes,
because
absolutely.
We're changing quite a bit.
Absolutely. As it is, the legislature has a 50% turnover every 2 years, so it isn't as if people go down there to stay normally.
Well, what would you like to say to viewers about somebody that's out there that may be considering running for office in another election? You
Well,
faced that challenge, and you've done very well
yes.
by it.
Well, I think first of all you have to decide who you are and what you believe in, and it has to be something that's discussed with your family because it affects your family members as well. So you have to go into it with open eyes and be willing to work hard, study the issues, get to meet the constituents, and don't think that it's going to be easy because, like I said before, it's very complex. And when we decide to run and ask people to vote for us, we have an obligation to deliver and to listen to them. So it changes your life completely. Depends on how committed you are to being a representative, and it's something that you don't do halfway.
Well, you said something real interesting there and key to me. What does the word representative mean to you?
In the Nevada State Legislature, I represent the people in Assembly District 24.
So that's all kinds of people.
In the state government, yes, I represent all of them.
And very different opinions.
Yes.
And that's kind of a balancing act sometimes?
Yes. Well, sometimes new people have trouble dealing with that, but that's one of the realities. That's our job.
That's one of the things you learn on
Yes.
the job. If you were to look back over your legislative career, what are some of those moments that stand out? Moments that you're either really proud of or something that you really learned sort of in a minute?
Oh, I think the recycling bill was an education, getting that through the process. An earlier session, we had, with Senator Ernie Adler in Carson City, we had passed a bill on mining reclamation, which I know is not a big issue in Reno, but it is for environmentalists.
Sure.
And during that period of time, there was a lot of discussion about the amount of gold mining in Nevada and the fact that we had no reclamation laws. So that taught me a lot about drafting bills and getting them through the process.
And now Nevada, I believe, is about third in the world in gold
Yes.
production?
Yes.
And
And the bill that we drafted, which was passed and the governor signed, is now bragged about by the entire industry, the governor, everyone. We have one of the best reclamation programs.
And it's really true. All I have to do is cross the border to the north and the south if you've been around here, and you can be really appalled because we don't see some of the things that go on in the rest of the world now because we do have.
Yeah, well, there isn't really a lot of interest in the rural issues, but I think that we all have an obligation to be aware of their issues as well as ours. And certainly getting that kind of a mindset in the legislature is important, that we need to reclaim our lands when we cause severe damage. It's an obligation.
What about when we cause severe damage to other human beings?
Well, that's a tough one nowadays because of the enormous growth. And I met today with some people who want to come into the state and work with the mentally ill who are addicted to gaming. So that is, just one part of the way things are developing and changing in our community.
What do you see as some major challenges then for the next 10 years then?
Well, I think doing planning, taking the long view, and what kind of a world are our children going to live in here. I think there are major issues now. They're certainly being discussed in the governor's race. Taxation, gaming, they're across the board. Healthcare, insurance. I don't know, help me.
It's all there.
Yes, it's all there.
And what would you like constituents to give you?
I would like for them to call me and talk to me about what's important to them. Sometimes it's hard to find out exactly what your constituents are thinking because we are busy with our legislative duties and our families, and they need to reach out to us, and that's what I wish they would do.
Of course, one of the things I'm always proud about is I think Nevada has a wonderful citizen-based legislature with people coming from all walks of life and different backgrounds, which provides a wonderful flavor. But I also think I'd like to underscore what you've said. We're small enough still that it's not just the representatives' responsibility, it's
That's right.
the constituents. And I believe all of you are real accessible.
We are.
And we do have all these modern things of telephone and fax and snail mail even, besides being able to visit people.
Well, a man called me today. I always answer my own phone. And he said, "You're the only legislator that I'm aware of who answers their own phone.
Well, I think he needs to, not to take away from you, but I think he needs to call a few others.
I would agree. I know there are others. I don't want anybody to take offense to that, but that is what he told me. So people do appreciate it when you make that effort.
And it's real easy.
Well, it is. It's intrusive on your family life, I must tell you. And you never know when you
Oh, but legislators are supposed to work 8 days a week, 25 hours a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're supposed to have all the answers.
Well, we're pretty good at that, but quite frankly, being as you brought that up, we find that many legislators do not remain more than 1 or 2 sessions because they simply cannot afford it. And I'd like to think that somewhere down the line, if we expect people to be citizen legislators, that they're paid at least a living wage.
And that brings up a whole other issue, which I will put on reserve.
Okay.
And I hope to invite you back at some other time, because that involves quite a bit of history as well as a lot of bit of analysis of how that would look for the next time. In our closing moments, are there any other wishes or programs that you'd like to leave with us to consider?
Well, I serve on Government Affairs Committee. I have for 6 sessions, where we talk about all the local issues in government, and I just think I'd just like to ask everybody to become more involved with their city and county government, their school boards, and be aware of what's going on and work with all of us.
I don't think you could have said it any better. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you here again on We the People.
You're welcome.